Well, just last week I had the privilege of spending 4 hours in the Sistine Chapel with my Word on Fire film crew. And we were doing the Michelangelo episode, so filming within the great Sistine Chapel. But toward the end of our time, the director of the Vatican Museums, who had been there with us, said, "Do you want to see the Room of Tears?" And I said, "Well, yes, of course." The Room of Tears is a little ante-room off the Sistine Chapel, where the newly elected Pope goes to be suited up in his white cassock. Well, the room now is filled with all kinds of, historical artifacts and memorabilia. What struck me, though, was this row of albs and chasubles and copes worn by famous popes. And one that caught my eye was a cope worn by Pope Pius VI. Not a household name, but Pius VI was an intriguing figure. Pope from 1775 to 1799. So he was Pope during our revolution and also during the French Revolution. Well, he became a great critic of the French Revolution and its rather bloody aftermath. And he saw what an opponent of the church the French Revolution would become. Well, it didn't go over well with the French, who invaded Italy, and they demanded that he cede the Papal States. When he refused, they arrested him, kept him, I think, in Florence for a time, then moved him to France, to the town of Valence, and he died there about 6 weeks after he arrived. So a kind of martyr in his opposition to a very aggressive secular state. Well, he was succeeded by Pius VII, who took his name as a sort of homage to Pius VI. In fact, one of his stoles or something was also in the Room of Tears. Well, Pius VII also ran afoul of the French, now under the control of Napoleon. And Napoleon came into Italy and arrested Pius VII, brought him back to France, held him prisoner. While there, by the way, Pius VII got off, I think, one of the great lines in the history of the papacy. Napoleon came to see him and he said, "I'm going to destroy the church." And Pius VII said, "Oh, you silly little man. You're trying to do what 17 centuries of priests and bishops have tried and failed to do." So good for you, Pius VII. These two Piuses are, of course, in a long line of great ecclesial figures who have kind of faced down aggressive secular power. Go back to the beginning of the church, the age of martyrs, and everyone from Peter and Paul to Felicity and Perpetua to Clement to Cyril and so on, were put to death by an aggressive state. Come up into the Middle Ages, and you've got Gregory VII, who faces down Henry IV. Come up into the 19th century, and you have Bismarck waging this great Kulturkampf against the Catholic Church in Germany. The 20th century is the greatest century of martyrs in the history of the church. So think of all those put to death by these very aggressive secular ideologies. All right, you're wondering, why is he bringing up all this rather grim history? Well, I do so, not to overstate the point, but to make a point about the recent statement of the Supreme Court about gay marriage. What concerns a not inconsiderable number of Catholics, and what frightens them a bit, is the way the statement was made, how it was framed and formulated. Namely, as the discovery of a right, a fundamental human right and freedom within the Constitution for a gay marriage. See, here's the problem. The problem is, once you formulate it that way, then anyone who stands opposed to that point of view is a bigot, is someone who doesn't respect fundamental freedoms, someone really in the grip of a irrational prejudice. You've, in a certain way, cut off rational argument, and you've just said, well, this person doesn't recognize fundamental rights. And therefore, those persons can be ostracized, they can be censored. At the limit, they can be moved off the public stage. And so Catholics worry about a potentially aggressive secular state on this issue. Now, to be sure, Justice Kennedy in his formulation has said reassuring things about, we're going to allow you to practice the faith as you see fit, but it seems to me hard to understand how, given the logic of the way the thing was formulated, that could long endure. Would someone say, for example, oh, well, the government shouldn't get involved if a business refuses on principle to hire black people? Well, no, the government would legitimately move against that irrational prejudice. Will the Catholic Church's opposition to gay marriage come to be seen in short compass as an irrational prejudice that can be moved against? So I think that's what's concerning Catholics. Part of the issue here is that for the past 100 years, maybe or so, we've been in a fairly benign relationship with the environing culture on these issues because there was a consensus across the denominational divides. I mean, Catholic, Jew, Protestant, non-believer over the past 100 years or so more or less believed the same thing about sexuality, about marriage, and so on. Well, all that blew apart, let's say, beginning in the 1970s. And so the consensus having been lost, what we face now is a kind of aggressive ideology of the subject. It's the free subject can determine what his or her life means. And what stands athwart that is the church that claims a certain objectivity to moral values. So I think that's part of what's facing us now is a new moment in this dialogue with the culture. I do think of Cardinal George, who was kind of a mentor to me, very often said the first move will be to privatize religion, to move it off the public stage. And you've certainly seen that. But they said the second move, once that's done, Cardinal always said, is the secular state will go after those practices of ours and teachings of ours that it finds repugnant. That's what we're worried about now. I think a lot of Catholics feel a bit beleaguered and moved into a defensive posture. So, what do we do? What do we do at this moment? Well, I think we continue to teach and to evangelize. We continue to put forward our point of view and the reasons for it, and to do so in a winsome way, not defensively, not aggressively, but in a winsome way, reaching out to our opponents and presenting the teaching in a positive way. I think that's really key. But also to keep in mind that we stand in a long and venerable tradition of people who have stood up to an aggressive secular state. There's a great cloud of witnesses, both living and dead, who surround us and who have made that stance, taken that stance. Keep in mind that we've been through this before and we're still standing.